Thank you, Professor. I'd like to just mention here that I'm present because in other papers, the name of the other researchers mentioned. So I'd like to acknowledge that this is a presentation by me on behalf of a team of 30 people who are part of this team, and two members of the senior members of the team are sitting here. This is a project or an activity which we are taking both a combination of pilot projects across India as well as some commercial projects. And this is an experience of a very large sample set. By now, I can tell you that we're doing a forecasting for close to 70,000 megawatt of load across India, including all the 9 northern states and some of the other states in west and southern part of India, central part of India. And in addition, this forecasting is for around 18,000 megawatt of wind and solar projects. And since I mentioned some of these are commercial projects, some of these projects are actually taking the penalty risks. So we have to ensure that the errors in the time block of 15 minutes, that's where the penalties are imposed, are minimal to the extent to avoid the penalties. So this is an experience based on an actual real-life work which we're doing with the team of around 30 people. This is what I'll cover in this presentation. What are the key steps involved? We'll show you the model which we're using and the key challenges which we are facing on a day-to-day basis. One more point I'd like to mention here is that while for load, the forecasting is done a day-ahead forecasting in a block of 15 minutes, so 96 blocks in a day. And for RE, for wind and solar, there's a combination of day-ahead and intraday because as per the regulation, 8 revisions are allowed for solar and 16 for wind. So these forecasts are available intraday to be able to be submitted to the SLDC for revisions as per the regulation. And then we'll talk briefly about how does it impact the profitability of the projects and show you a typical load curve. Mr. Mathur is from Rajasthan. I'll show you a typical load curve for a day for load, wind, and solar so that you can kind of understand how does it look like and how power as a commodity could be traded not only within the country but in the region if you do it more accurately. So step one is, so there are 5 or 6 key steps to reach a good level of, because here error means accuracy levels less than 98% is not acceptable to the SLDCs or to RLDCs, whosoever is taking the forecast. And when we say 98%, not an average for 98%, but the expectation is that you achieve a high accuracy in each of the 96 blocks. So first step is to getting the historical data. If it is demand, then for demand data. If it's for generation, then the generation data. Then you also need to collect the historical weather data because that's another critical factor. That's where we faced maximum challenges because weather data, as on today, probably is available, but historical weather data for a particular site, that's a multiple challenge, and especially even size of country of the size of India and some of the states which are very big, very difficult to get weather data for multiple lat longs. So this is another area which we collect and collect very diligently. And the third aspect of the data, which is a collection of the real-time data as the load flows for demand as well as for the generation. And you can imagine the size of data because this is a humongous size of data. Each files are large and the kind of data which has to be kind of collected and collated and sanitized because just collecting the data is not good enough. There's a lot of inconsistencies in the data. You need to sanitize it and probably given the size of it, now we have to move to big data because this probably in the normal servers, it's hard to handle now. It's getting more difficult to handle the size of data. And then based on the data, there is a trend analysis done, which kind of studies the seasonalities, the impact of the weather. For example, give an example, 1 degree increase in temperature during the summer peak can increase the daily load by 500 to 600 megawatt. So these are significant impacts, and you need to understand it, and you need to kind of analyze it beforehand. Sorry. And then there are other factors like a festival impact or a holiday impact. Diwali in the month of October and Diwali in the month of November have different impacts on the load. And these needs to be kind of incorporated into the model. Then comes the weather analysis and procurement, because the challenge on weather has been highlighted by some of the other researchers, and that's something which we have to use real time. Sometimes large states, we are currently using for large states 2 or 3 weather points, because the state data is available as an integrated data. State is not giving us disaggregated data for different locations. So while we are trying our best to use 2, 3 locations for a large state, for generation stations, each lat long cloud movement, other data is not available. So we are using the nearest possible lat long data, whichever is available for the weather. Algos are deployed. It's a moving algos, because algos deployment is again the function of the result analysis on a daily basis. Every day result is analyzed on what went wrong yesterday, because you need to, on a constant basis, keep improving the algos. Machine learning algos have to be updated, though the algos itself does some self-correction, but the data scientists have to continuously monitor the errors and continuously update the algos. So these are the steps which is involved in creating this model, which I'll just briefly show you. So this is a kind of what we call a dual ensemble model, which is a combination of the power data as well as the weather data, and it has to be matched. We are currently using 4 weather sources, 2 domestic, both MCM and IITM data we are getting, and then we are getting 2 international sources. And sometimes, for strange reasons, for different locations, different weather sources are more accurate. So again, this is hard to say why, but for different locations, different weather sources are more accurate, and that's what we are using. And so multiple algos are kind of married to multiple weather sources, and then based on the machine learning, then it picks up one, because to SLDC you can't give multiple forecasts, you have to give them one forecast. So you have to select the best forecast and then give it to them. And then for the RE and wind, again, that needs to be given to the QCA, and which is again given to the SLDC. And you again need to continuously keep revising it based on the errors which happens, because the revisions are allowed, and you need to kind of minimize the penalty for your generator or the client in this case. In some cases, we have taken commercial risk. So it's also to minimize the penalties which happens in case of a particular generating station. And then based on that, the forecast is created and the schedule is created. And these are all, again, as I said, for demand. You can create anytime real-time forecast, because on the screen, user, which could be SLDC or an RLDC, can create a real-time forecast as on the data available right now. But for typically what we provide is that a day-ahead forecast to SLDC, and for generation, it's a combination of day-ahead as well as intraday, based on the number of revisions which is currently permitted. And on a regular basis, the analysis of the errors which is coming up, and it is analyzed and kind of incorporated into the model. So moving from the model, I'll quickly focus on what the challenges which we are facing. Because the challenges are important here. As I mentioned, there's a penalty involved. There is a commercial impact involved on the project. What biggest challenge is, of course, been the weather, because especially when there is an instantaneous change in the weather conditions, very hard to predict. The model which we're using, NWP, is not able to capture sudden changes, and it contributes to high deviation. Mind you, even in a particular month, for month of August, for example, one particular plant which we are forecasting, 2 or 3 blocks created the maximum errors. So 2-3 blocks of 15 minutes can just kill you all your good results which you have achieved over the month. So 96 into 30, those 96 into 30, you might be right, but if you're getting the errors very high in 3 or 4 blocks, the size of penalty which you will incur will be humongous. So that's why it is important to get it right and right in each block. And that is where we are facing difficulties, especially in monsoon period. Month of August, July are the worst, because this time it's very hard to predict the sudden disruption in the weather condition. Plus, again, for a load, is a big states. India has, within states there are multiple regions. While the power data is available from one source and there is single power data available, there are multiple weather sources. We are using 2 or 3, but still those are the errors which we still get. Another challenge which we face is the weather suppliers. Now, weather data is available from all the 4 sources which we're getting twice a day. That's it. Because for our revisions, we need more often. And they come in the block of, they either give us a 3-hourly or 1-hourly. So now IITM is giving us 1-hourly, and there are some others who are giving us 1-hourly also. But now we have to downscale it to 15-minute block. And that is when, the difficulty of the accuracy, especially on the sudden changes, happens. So weather across multiple parameters, I hope the weather scientists and people who are dealing with weather will kind of look into it, because this is a huge impact, especially with RE integration, RE increasing in the grid. This would be a huge impact. If the weather, because I come from the power side of this profession, and if the weather does not improve to address these issues, we can try our best, but there would be challenges. I mean, for example, why only 2 revisions in a day? If we can get 4 or 5 times revisions, there are satellites available. But if though 4 or 5 revisions are possible, probably the forecast levels and the accuracy levels can improve significantly from here. Another thing which happens, which is again is a power side problem. This is mostly when, again, the turbulent weather condition happens. And this is a graph you can see. There's a certain dip for an hour, 2-hour block. There's a certain dip in the demand. Now, our forecast was more consistent, but the dip in demand could be either the RTUs are down, the SCADA data is not coming, or actually there's a tripping in demand. Now, the tripping in demand is actually demand has fallen. Can't do anything much about that. I mean, of course, these are weather conditions. So here the solution could have been that the SCADA data the telemetry is improved, plus SCADA data is backed by the meter data on a real-time basis. If the meter data is also coming from on a real-time basis, there would have been a way to correct that error, because SCADA flow would be, because meter is on which you're doing the billing, but meter data is not coming on real time, and meter data and SCADA data, if both coming on real time, would have been able to address this issue. So this is another area where the inaccuracies, and again, I'm not saying inaccuracies on a kind of a multiple blocks. So in a day, 5, 6 blocks or 6 blocks, especially when India is thinking of moving towards a real-time market. In Europe, you can reschedule it within 5 minutes. India, you can reschedule in 2 to 3 hours. But when you are moving towards a real-time market, when you're having a large generation, which will be must-run, wind and solar, you need to get this corrected to the extent possible. Otherwise, the penalties, the DSM penalties which states are bearing, the DSM penalties which the generators are bearing will continue to be high, and it will be hard to impose the penalties. I know Rajasthan has imposed it, but there's a stay from High Court. So these things will happen, because generators will keep coming back to say that, how do we address this? This is not my problem. This is a problem of the system, and the system needs to come back and address this issue. Well, this is something which we have been, since we have been dealing with multiple SLDCs and RLDCs now, we see that 2 years back, this was when so accuracy levels improve. So 2 years back, when things were not so good, for Discom, RE was a pariah. They would never want to touch an RE power. They wish that there was no RE power in the system, because they were finding it difficult to integrate to the grid. Now, with some kind of a system in place, some kind of a forecasting in place, regulation in place to impose penalties, things improving, but still there are multiple challenges which I mentioned on the weather side, as well as on the data side for the data flow, both on the SCADA and the SCM data. And once it improves, hopefully next 1 or 2 years, probably we'll see a much more balance and much more acceptability of the RE power and a better integration of the grid. Just to show you how, these are not small numbers. We have calculated, these are actual penalties of a wind and a solar project. So this will mean that 2 to 3% of the revenue, which already hard-pressed, because under the bidding, the tariff achieved for the wind and solar is anyway low. So if you lose out on 2 or 3% of your off-take rate because of the penalties, obviously the investors should be concerned about it. And these projects will be non-viable. if they lose this kind of a money. Right now, that's what is happening. If the current penalties are imposed, 2 to 3% of their offtake rate will go away. And that would significantly impact the profitability of the project. And this, just to give you a sense of how does the load curve, this is the state of Rajasthan, not mentioned here, but this is 1 day's load curve for Rajasthan. This is how the load moves. And this is integrated solar load. Rajasthan around 300 megawatt, 3,000, 2,000 odd megawatt of solar. And this is a total solar curve for the day for state
Mr.
of
Kumar, sorry, 2 minutes more.
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
I'll finish this. And this is the wind curve. The scale is different from left-hand side and right-hand side. So wind curve and solar curve for the state and the load curve, they need not necessarily move in the same direction. They move in opposite directions, and you need to find a way to balance them. So this was probably, the last point I wanted to make is that we've seen within the region, for example, Nepal buys power from India, Bangladesh buys power from India. They really have no way to really know how much kind of a demand, what time of the demand they do. Within India, at least, we have a much better sense. But if you want to create a regional balance, if you want to have more RE into the region, better quality forecasting within India and in the region would help in improving the overall balance of the grid, as well as ensuring a much lower cost of power purchase by the distribution companies, which are bleeding by and large across the country and probably in these countries also, would help in optimizing the power as a resource and help in more RE integration, improvement of greenhouse gases emissions, and help the overall grid in terms of everything. That's it from my side. Thank you.